It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when my grandson Jamie burst through my door, his face pale and eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. The wooden floor creaked beneath his sneakers, and the screen door slapped shut behind him as he stood in the middle of my living room catching his breath. I was in my old recliner, the one Elizabeth used to say needed replacing 15 years ago. I hadn't moved much that day. The house was still, except for the slow ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of cicadas humming through the August heat outside. I was holding a newspaper I wasn't reading when he said it. "Grandpa, they're meeting tonight to change your will." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. I blinked at him. The sentence hung in the air like the smoke from a match that had just been struck. I sat up straighter. "What did you just say?" Jamie hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. He stepped closer. "I heard Mom. She was on the phone with Uncle Rick. I think they're meeting at his place tonight. She said something about a lawyer and not waiting anymore." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stared at the boy. 15 years old, all knees and elbows, but with eyes that always watched more than they spoke. He looked so much like his father, my son, when he was that age, back before everything went wrong. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" He nodded quickly. "They were talking about the house and the land and—" He stopped, his voice tightening. "About how you're not really in a state to be making decisions anymore." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. Not in a state to be making decisions. That's what they were saying now. After all the years I carried this family on my back, through winters that cracked the bones and summers that dried the fields. After the cancer took Elizabeth and left me with silence so heavy I thought it might kill me too. And now my children were meeting in secret, deciding what to do with what I'd built, as if I were already gone, as if I hadn't already lost enough. "Why did you tell me this?" I asked him. Jamie didn't hesitate. "Because you're still here. And they talk like you're not. That's not right." His eyes were wet now, not from fear but from loyalty. That kind of loyalty you don't see much in people anymore, let alone in a teenager. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Jamie. That means more than you know." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I didn't mean to get anyone in trouble. I just thought you should know." "You did the right thing," I said, and I meant it. He gave me a small, unsure smile and turned to go. "Jamie." He paused at the door. "If they ask, just say you stopped by to return a book. Don't tell them we talked about this." He nodded again. "Okay." And just like that, he was gone. The door closed gently this time. His steps faded down the front walk, and the silence returned. But it was different now. The stillness in the house had teeth. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph of Elizabeth on the mantel, her smile frozen in time. She always told me not to be so stubborn, not to let pride get in the way of peace. But pride was all I had left, wasn't it? I never thought it would come to this. My own children, plotting behind closed doors, deciding how to divide my life before it was even finished. But maybe this was the moment I stopped watching everything fall apart from the sidelines. Maybe it was time to speak, to confront, to remember. Because if they were rewriting the ending of my story, I sure as hell was going to be there for it. After Jamie left, I sat in that old chair until the light in the room changed from gold to grey. Shadows stretched across the hardwood floor like long fingers, and I could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside, the wind picking up before dusk. I hadn't moved an inch, but inside something had shifted. I thought about Sarah first, my eldest. Always the organized one, always the one with a plan. She'd been that way since she was a girl, lining up her stuffed animals in perfect rows, telling her younger brother what to do, what to say. When she was 16, she said she'd never live in a small town like ours again. She kept that promise. Then I thought about Rick, my youngest, the quiet one, the one who used to spend hours fishing down by the creek without saying a word. He was the first to drift away after Elizabeth died, claimed it was too hard to come back to the house. Too many memories. Now those two, the ones who'd slowly removed themselves from my life, were meeting tonight, lawyer in tow, to decide what to do with the scraps I'd leave behind. I stood slowly, knees creaking, and shuffled to the kitchen, The kettle was still warm from earlier, so I poured myself another cup of tea. My hands shook slightly as I lifted it to my lips. They think I'm slipping, that I'm soft in the head, that grief or age or time has taken something essential from me, and maybe it has. But not enough to stop me from understanding betrayal, not enough to forget. I carried the tea to my study, a small room in the back of the house where I kept my books, my letters, and a few pieces of my old life, the life I'd lived before everything frayed at the edges. On the desk sat a stack of legal papers I hadn't touched in months. The current will was still in place. Nothing fancy, just what was fair. The house to be divided equally, the land to remain in the family, a small fund for Jamie's education. I never asked for thanks, I just wanted to be remembered with decency. Now I was being erased before I even left. The phone rang, sharp, sudden, jarring. I stared at it for a second before picking up. "Hello? Dad, hey, it's Sarah." Her voice was tight, not nervous exactly, just rehearsed. "Evening," I said, keeping my tone flat. She hesitated. "I was just calling to check in, see how you're doing." "How thoughtful," I replied, letting the silence speak louder than the words. Another pause. "So, Rick and I are getting together tonight, just to go over some things." I could almost hear her glance at notes she'd written for herself. "I see. Nothing serious, of course, just, preparation. With how things have been lately?" She meant my health, or what she assumed about it. "You're always preparing, Sarah," I said, not unkindly. "That's your way." She laughed, though it didn't sound natural. "Well, I'll let you go, just wanted to say hi." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Tell Rick I said hello." "Will do." "Love you, Dad." I didn't respond right away. Then, "Good night." I hung up and placed the receiver back on its cradle. The lies were thick in the air now, cloaked in niceties, polished with practiced smiles. But Jamie had told me the truth, and that changed everything. I stood and looked out the window down the dirt road that led to the town. Somewhere down there they'd be gathering soon, around a table, reshaping the future I was still part of. I needed to go, not to fight, but to listen, to watch, to see what kind of people my children had become when they thought I wasn't looking. I hadn't been to Rick's house in years, not since that Thanksgiving when Sarah accused me of favoring him, and Rick walked out halfway through dinner. Maybe tonight would be different, or maybe it would be the final nail in a coffin I hadn't agreed to lie in. Either way, I wasn't going to wait in the shadows. I was going to face them. One last time. By the time I pulled into Rick's driveway, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky brushed with purples and fading orange. His house sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac, far from the fields and woods I once knew, tucked between houses that all looked the same. Identical mailboxes, trimmed hedges, porch lights flickering on as night arrived. I sat in the car for a moment, my fingers curled around the steering wheel, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. I hadn't driven this far in over a year, not because I couldn't, but because there hadn't been a reason to, until tonight. Through the front window I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains, 3 figures, maybe 4. Sarah's dark hair, stiff with hairspray, Rick's broader build, another man, likely the lawyer, and someone else I couldn't quite place. I opened the door and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. A cicada screeched somewhere in the trees. The air was still thick with summer, warm, almost suffocating. I didn't knock when I got to the door. I simply opened it. The conversation inside stopped immediately, like someone had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Sarah turned first, the wineglass in her hand frozen mid-air. Rick stood behind the kitchen counter, holding a pen. Papers were spread across the dining table. A younger man in a suit, thin with a receding hairline and nervous eyes, sat between them. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Dad?" Sarah said, blinking. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," I said flatly. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "Thought I'd drop by?" Rick cleared his throat. "We didn't know you were planning on coming." "No, I imagine you didn't." There was a long pause. The lawyer stood slowly. "I'm Thomas," he said. "Just here in an advisory capacity." "You can sit," I said. "I'm not here to throw anyone out. I just wanted to see what this family meeting looked like." Sarah's eyes darted to Rick, then back to me. "It's nothing personal, Dad. We were just going over some estate things, just in case." "In case what? I die in my sleep tonight?" I asked, stepping closer. "You've already decided what to do with my land, my house?" Rick shifted uncomfortably. "You haven't exactly been communicative. We didn't know where your head's been lately." "My head is right here," I said, tapping my temple. "Still working, still remembering, still listening." Sarah set down her wine glass, more forcefully than she needed to. "We were trying to take some responsibility, to be prepared. You've shut us out for years." I let out a short laugh. It wasn't amused. "You think I shut you out?" "Sarah, when's the last time you called to ask how I was doing, not just what I planned to leave behind?" She flinched but didn't respond. Rick looked at the papers in front of him, suddenly fascinated by the ink. "I wasn't trying to cut you out, Dad," he mumbled. "No?" I asked. "Because Jamie heard the two of you talking. Heard enough to come to me shaking. That got their attention." Sarah blinked. "Jamie?" "Yes, your son Sarah, the one you leave with me every other weekend when it's convenient. He's the one who still sees me, who still talks to me like I matter." She looked away. I took a deep breath and looked around the room. A nice kitchen, granite countertops, a new chandelier above the dining table. Comfortable, polished, hollow. "This meeting you're having? You could have invited me. I might not be as sharp as I once was, but I still know how to speak, still know how to think." "We didn't mean to go behind your back," Rick said. "We just thought you wouldn't want to deal with it." "That's the problem, Rick. You thought, but you didn't ask." I walked slowly to the table and placed my hand on the stack of papers. "Whatever plans you're making, they can wait. Because this isn't about who gets what. It's about who we are to each other." No one spoke. The lawyer shifted awkwardly in his seat. I looked at both of them, then said quietly, "I don't want to spend what time I have left watching my children squabble over things. I want to remember the family we used to be. Or at least try." Sarah's eyes were glassy now, her jaw clenched. "We should have talked to you," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "You should have." And then the room fell silent again. Not cold, not angry, just still. For the first time in years, we were all in the same room, breathing the same air with nothing left to pretend. I didn't sit down right away. I stood by the table, my hand still resting lightly on the stack of papers, as if touching them would ground me. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to get, loud and sharp like a struck match. This was different, quieter, the kind of disappointment that settles in your bones and stays there. Rick finally pulled out a chair and gestured toward it. "You want to sit?" I looked at him for a second, then nodded and eased myself down. The wood creaked beneath me, reminding me of my age. Sarah sat opposite, arms crossed, her mouth tight. The lawyer, Thomas, picked up his pen again, but didn't dare write anything. "What exactly were you changing?" I asked, though I already knew. Rick cleared his throat. "We were just talking about simplifying things." "Which means?" "Putting the house in Sarah's name," he said, "and the land split between us. You know, so things aren't messy when I'm dead." Silence. Sarah spoke up. "It wasn't about being cruel, Dad. You've been living out there alone. No help, no backup plan. It's dangerous. We were just trying to be practical." "Practical," I repeated. The word tasted sour in my mouth. "You know what would have been practical? Talking to me before you talk to a lawyer." Thomas raised a hand slightly. "In their defense, Mr. Wilcox." "Call me Henry," I interrupted flatly. "And don't defend them. They're grown." He fell silent. I looked at Sarah, then Rick. "You know, your mother and I wrote our first will when she was pregnant with you, Sarah. We had nothing back then, just a rented farmhouse and a truck that barely ran. But we still wanted to put something on paper, just in case. We wanted to protect you." Sarah's face softened, but only slightly. "After she died, I updated it. Didn't touch it again. Not because I was lazy, but because I thought I'd made my intentions clear. I thought you'd understand that legacy isn't about money. It's about memory, about care. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. I guess we lost sight of that. No, Rick. You didn't lose sight. You looked the other way. That landed heavier than I expected. He looked down at the table, his fingers tapping softly against the wood, like he was searching for rhythm or courage. I didn't know how to come back, he said, barely audible. After Mum died, the house felt like a grave. I watched him, surprised by the honesty. Sarah sighed. And I was angry, for a long time. You always seemed closer to Rick. I guess I started thinking if I didn't stay ahead of things, I'd get left behind. You were never left behind, I said, more tired than stern. You both walked away. Another silence, not bitter, just heavy. I don't want to fight, I said finally. I don't want my last years to be spent wondering who's going to sell what, who's going to claim what. I want to look at you both and know you still remember who raised you, who held your hands when you were sick, who stayed up nights when money was gone and the mortgage was due. I remember, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Rick didn't say anything, but his eyes met mine, and that was enough. Thomas stood, clearly sensing the meeting had taken a turn that no contract could fix. I'll leave you to it, he said quietly, gathering his things. Wait, I said before he reached the door. He turned. Leave the papers. He hesitated, then nodded and placed them back on the table before slipping out. The three of us sat in the quiet. No TV, no distractions, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of the porch light drawing moths in the dark. I'm not going to live forever, I said, but I'm not gone yet. And if there's anything left to be fixed between us, I want to fix it while I still can. Sarah wiped a tear. I don't know how. Then we start with dinner, I said. Sunday, at my place, no documents, no agendas, just food, and maybe a few apologies. Rick looked unsure. Bring Jamie, I added. He smiled faintly. Okay. Sarah nodded too. Okay. It was a start. Fragile, tentative, but real. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man waiting for the end. I felt like a father again. Sunday came with the kind of sun that warmed the bones, the kind of light that made everything look softer. The trees, the house, even the gravel on the driveway seemed less harsh under it. I was up early, long before the church bells rang in town, setting the table the way Elizabeth used to. Forks on the left, knives and spoons on the right, folded napkins with little creases she used to press with her thumbs. It had been years since I'd had them both in my house at the same time. I moved slowly but with purpose. Every plate I laid down, every step I took to the kitchen and back, felt like a quiet act of rebuilding something that had been broken so long we stopped noticing the cracks. Jamie arrived first with Rick carrying a store-bought pecan pie and a six-pack of ginger ale. Rick was dressed casually, a baseball cap in his hand and a look in his eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Maybe nervousness, maybe hope. Need help with anything? He asked, as Jamie ran to greet the old hound in the backyard. I nodded toward the kitchen. You can mash the potatoes if you've still got the arms for it. He smiled, relieved at the ease in my tone. Sarah came 20 minutes later, holding a covered dish and a small bouquet of sunflowers. She stepped inside and paused, looking around like it was the first time she was seeing the house for what it was, not a place haunted by silence, but one filled with stubborn love. It smells like Mom used to make, she said softly. She'd be proud of the roast, I told her. Still can't get the gravy right, though. She smiled and we hugged, awkward at first, then real. By 1 o'clock, we were all seated at the table, Jamie between me and Rick, Sarah at the head. No phones, no paperwork. Just plates and forks and the scent of rosemary and meat and memories too old to name. The conversation started slow, like an engine turning over after years untouched. Jamie talked about school, a science project he was building, a girl he liked but wouldn't name. Rick told a story about a fishing trip that went sideways, the kind that ended with more tangled lines than caught fish. Sarah asked about the old oak tree out front, the one she used to climb, and I told her it was still stronger than most things in this world. There was laughter, not loud, but true. Then, as the plates emptied and the air settled, the conversation shifted. "I keep thinking about Mom lately," Sarah said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "How she'd handle all this, how she'd probably knock our heads together and tell us to grow up." "She'd do it with a smile, though," Rick added. "Maybe," I said, "but she'd also tell us that pain doesn't make people unlovable, just complicated." We all fell quiet. Jamie spoke next. "I don't remember much about Grandma, just her hands. They were warm, always smelled like flour." "That's because she was always baking something," I said, smiling. "Even when no one was hungry." Sarah glanced at me. "Do you think she'd be disappointed in us?" "No," I said without hesitation. "Just sad that we forgot how to see each other." Rick cleared his throat. "I was angry after she passed, at you, at everything. I blamed you for being calm when I was falling apart." "I wasn't calm," I replied. "I just didn't know how to show it." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words landed like a stone in a still pond. Not loud, but deep. Sarah reached for my hand. "Me too. I think I just didn't know how to stay connected to you without Mom." I squeezed her fingers gently. "I understand. Forgiveness doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet, passed like a bowl of mashed potatoes across a table." After dessert, Jamie helped me wash the dishes. Sarah took pictures of old family portraits in the hallway. Rick stood out on the porch with a glass of ginger ale, watching the wind move through the trees. Before they left, Sarah turned to me on the porch. "We'll come next Sunday too, if that's okay." "It's more than okay," I said. Rick patted my shoulder as they walked to the car. "You're not getting rid of us that easy." Jamie lingered, hugging me tightly. "I'm glad you showed up that night," I whispered in his ear. "You saved something, Jamie. You really did." He smiled up at me, his eyes soft. "I just didn't want them to forget who you are." And then he was gone, the car pulling away down the dirt road. I stood on the porch long after the taillights disappeared, listening to the wind in the trees. Inside, the house was quiet again, but not empty. Never empty. The next Sunday came, just like they promised. Then another, and another. Something fragile had begun to form between us, not a return to the family we once were, but the slow emergence of something new, something cautious and real. We were no longer strangers orbiting around shared grief and forgotten birthdays. We were speaking again, eating together, breathing in the same rooms without needing to fill the air with explanations or excuses. But healing isn't linear, I knew that. And sometimes silence returns when you least expect it. It was early September when I first noticed Sarah growing distant again. She smiled less, stayed late at work, sent Jamie with Rick a few weekends in a row. She wasn't cold, just not fully present, like she was walking through a fog I couldn't see. One Sunday, she didn't come at all. Jamie arrived with Rick, holding a container of Sarah's famous cornbread, a note taped to the top. "Sorry, Dad, busy week. Next Sunday for sure. Love, S." I read the note twice before setting it aside. Rick watched me carefully. "She's been overwhelmed," he offered. "Deadlines, some legal stuff, nothing serious, I think." I nodded, though something inside me twisted. Later that evening, Jamie sat on the porch beside me as the cicadas droned in the trees and the sky turned the color of bruised peaches. "Grandpa," he said slowly, "do you think people can change, but still keep secrets?" I looked down at him. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, but I could see the weight on him. I hear things. Stuff Mom doesn't think I understand. Something about the will again. She was on the phone last night with someone. Maybe Uncle Rick, maybe not. She was upset. I felt that familiar tightness return to my chest. I thought we'd moved past this. I had believed the dinner table could erase years of neglect, that maybe they'd seen me again, really seen me. I had been wrong. "I'm sorry, Jamie," I said softly. He frowned. "You didn't do anything." But that wasn't true. I had raised them. I had made choices that led us here. And maybe I had buried some of my own guilt so deep I couldn't see it anymore. After Jamie and Rick left, I walked into my study and sat down at the desk. I pulled out the copy of my will, the one I had updated again just weeks ago after that first Sunday meal. I had adjusted it to reflect the good in them, the change I believed in. It was simple, fair, heartfelt, and now I wasn't sure if it would hold. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace, Elizabeth's old shawl draped over my shoulders, thinking back to the first time Sarah lied to me. She was 13, had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball, and blamed the boys down the street. I found out a week later. She cried for hours when I confronted her. "I just didn't want you to be disappointed," she'd said. What she didn't understand then, and maybe still didn't, was that it wasn't the mistake that hurt. It was the dishonesty. I picked up the phone the next morning and called her. No answer. I tried again that afternoon, straight to voicemail. By Thursday, I'd left 2 more messages, short, kind, firm. By Friday, Jamie called to say she was going out of town for a work conference. No explanation, no return call. I stared at the window for a long time after that. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, soft but certain. Something was wrong. Rick came by the following Sunday alone, said he hadn't heard from Sarah in days either, which struck me as odd. They were always in contact, especially when family matters were involved. "She's shutting down again," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "She's hiding something," I corrected him. Rick looked at me, unsure whether to argue. "What if it's not about the will?" he asked. "What else would it be?" He hesitated. "Something else she didn't tell you. Something she hasn't told me either, maybe." I folded my hands in my lap. The weight of unspoken things seemed to press against my chest again. "You think she's sick?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. And that silence, heavier than anything he could have said, told me more than I wanted to know. I didn't confront Rick right away. Something in his face, the way he stirred that coffee, the way he avoided my eyes, told me he knew more than he wanted to say. But he wasn't ready. Maybe he didn't have all the pieces himself. Instead, I went quiet, waited. I've learned that truth has its own clock. You can chase it, corner it, demand it, but it'll only come out when it's ready, when the walls people build to protect themselves finally crack from the inside. It was Jamie who brought it to me. 2 weeks later, after Sarah missed another Sunday, he showed up alone, riding his bike all the way from town. His cheeks were flushed from the heat, his shirt damp with sweat. But he wasn't out of breath. He was full of something else. Worry. He didn't even sit down. Just stood in the doorway, his hands clenched around the straps of his backpack. "She's in trouble," he said, like he'd rehearsed it a dozen times on the ride over. I set down my book and looked up. "What kind of trouble?" "She's been seeing doctors. I found papers in the kitchen drawer, labs, tests, words I didn't understand. I tried to ask her, but she changed the subject. She said everything's fine, but..." His voice cracked. He blinked fast, trying not to cry. "I don't believe her, Grandpa. I think she's sick." The air in the room changed, went still. I stood slowly and walked to him. I placed my hands on his shoulders. "You did the right thing telling me. She's going to be mad. Maybe. But that's not what matters now." That evening I called Rick again. This time, I didn't ask. "She's sick," I said, not as a question. He didn't answer right away. Then, "I didn't know for sure, but yeah, I suspected. She's been off canceling things, keeping people away." "What is it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I think she's waiting for results." I sat down hard in the chair by the phone. My knees didn't buckle, but it felt close. "She didn't tell either of us," I said, more to myself than to him. "She probably thought she was protecting us." I let the silence grow between us, thinking. "No," I said finally. "She was protecting herself." From having to say it out loud, Rick exhaled long and tired. "Yeah, maybe that too." That Sunday I cooked anyway, set the table, left her chair empty, and the following Wednesday I drove to her house unannounced. Jamie opened the door, surprised but not alarmed. "She's in the bedroom," he whispered. "Hasn't come out much." I nodded, walked down the hall and stood outside her door, knocked once. "It's me." A pause, then her voice, tired, quieter than I remembered ever hearing it. "Come in." She was sitting up in bed, surrounded by folded laundry and unopened envelopes. Her hair was loose, eyes puffy. Her laptop was open on her lap, but she closed it as I entered. "You found out," she said. I nodded. "Jamie told me." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't want anyone to worry, not yet." I pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down. "You're my daughter," I said. "I've worried about you since the day you were born. That's not something you get to turn off." Her eyes filled then slowly. She didn't blink them away this time. "I'm waiting on results," she said. "They found something in my breast. The first test wasn't clear. The second one scared them. So now I wait. MRI's scheduled for next week." "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged. "Because you've already lost enough, and because I didn't want to see that look in your eyes. The one you're giving me now." I took her hand, and we sat there in the stillness. "I can handle bad news," I said. "What I can't handle is distance, not again, not with you." She nodded quietly. "I'm sorry, Dad." I squeezed her hand. "You don't need to be. You just need to let us in." After that night in Sarah's bedroom, something in me settled, and something else unraveled. She had let me in finally, but what I saw behind that door was more than illness. It was fear, not just of a diagnosis, but of needing people, of being seen in a moment of vulnerability. Sarah had always carried herself like a storm held just beneath the surface, composed, calculated, strong. But now she was stripped of all that, and beneath it, she looked like the girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. The next day, I called Rick and told him. "She told me," I said. "You should come." He didn't hesitate. "Tonight?" "Tonight." We sat in Sarah's living room together that evening, me, Rick, and Jamie, while Sarah stayed curled on the couch, arms around a pillow, hair pulled back in a messy knot. She didn't speak much. None of us did, really. But we were there. Sometimes presence is louder than words. Rick brought her tea. I read aloud from an old book she used to love. Jamie sat at her feet and played with the frayed hem of the blanket. It was the kind of silence that said, "We see you. We're not going anywhere." As the week went on, the waiting became heavier. She tried to act normal, going through emails, shuffling papers, folding towels, but I could see her hands shaking sometimes, could see how she lingered in doorways like she was forgetting what she came for. One morning I found her sitting at the kitchen table staring at an envelope. "This is it," she said when I walked in. Results came early. I didn't speak, just pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She opened it with the care of someone disarming a bomb. Her eyes moved across the page slowly, too slowly. Then she stopped, stared. Tears gathered, but didn't fall. "It's malignant," she said. I closed my eyes for a moment. My chest felt tight, not with panic, but with something heavier. That powerless ache a parent feels when pain comes for their child, and you can't stop it. "They want more scans. It's not small." They said, "Surgery, chemo, radiation, the whole list." She didn't sound scared, just flat, like someone reading directions off a card. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Okay," I said, "then we face it." She blinked, surprised. "You're not falling apart." "I already did," I said, "last week, when I saw you hiding it." Her lip trembled, and then the tears came. Not loud, just quiet streams that fell unchecked. "I don't want to be weak in front of Jamie," she whispered. "You won't be," I said. "You'll show him what strength really looks like." We spent the next few days building a new rhythm, appointments, calls, lists of questions. I went with her to the first oncology consult, sat in the corner with a notebook. Rick met us after, eyes red but jaw set. "He's clearing his schedule," Sarah said later, to be around. Good, I replied. Jamie stayed close, asked quiet questions, sat beside his mom during long afternoons on the couch, his head resting against her shoulder. He didn't talk about the cancer much, but one night while we were sitting on the porch again, he asked, "Will she lose her hair?" I nodded slowly. "She might." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I shave mine when she does?" That was Jamie. All heart. Sarah's treatment plan was aggressive. Doctors didn't waste time. Surgery scheduled. Chemo to follow. The kind of roadmap that's hard to look at all at once. So we didn't. We just took the next step. And then the next. One night, as I was putting the dishes away after dinner, she came into the kitchen holding the will. "My copy," she said, placing it on the table. "The one you changed after that first Sunday dinner." I looked at it, then at her. "I want you to change it again," she said, "to reflect Jamie." "I already did," I replied. "You didn't think I'd forget him, did you?" She smiled barely. "I also want to ask you something else. Anything. If I don't make it, I want Jamie to stay with you. Not Rick, not my ex. With you, until he's grown." The words landed hard, though she said them so gently. "I'm not planning on dying, Dad. I'm going to fight, but I need to know he'll be okay." I swallowed hard, nodded once. "He'll have a home here," I said. "Always." She reached out and touched my face, her hand cold but steady. "I'm so glad you came to Rick's that night, that Jamie told you." "I am too," I said. "It brought us back to each other." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Peace. Fragile, yes, but real. Autumn came suddenly that year. The trees along the roads into town lit up like fire. Oranges, reds, golds so deep they looked almost unreal in the morning light. The world was changing, and so were we. Sarah's surgery was scheduled for the first Monday of October. That morning, I drove her to the hospital myself. Rick followed behind with Jamie, both of them quiet during the ride. We didn't play music, we didn't talk much. There was a heaviness in the air that no words could soften, but her hand was in mine the whole way. Inside the surgical waiting area, it smelled like antiseptic and distant coffee, the kind of place where time slows down and every second stretches longer than it should. Sarah changed into the hospital gown without protest, tied her hair back, and kissed Jamie gently on the forehead. "I'll be back soon," she said, stronger. Jamie nodded, his face a mask of bravery, but I could see the panic behind his eyes. I remembered that look. I'd worn it myself when Elizabeth first went into surgery all those years ago. Before they wheeled her away, she looked at me. "If I don't wake up, you will." "Promise me, Dad." "I promise." Her eyes lingered on mine for one more moment, and then the doors swung shut behind her. We waited. Hours passed. Rick paced. Jamie sat silently beside me, staring at the floor, his fingers gripping the edge of his hoodie. I wanted to say something, anything, but every word I could think of felt too small. Finally, the surgeon came out, tall, gentle-voiced, the kind of man who knew his words mattered. "She's stable," he said. "Surgery went well. We got it out. Margins are clean, but we'll still follow with chemo, just to be safe." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 3 days. Jamie smiled for the first time all week. Rick looked like he'd just come back from underwater. We were allowed to see her a few hours later. She was groggy, pale, her voice a whisper, but she smiled when she saw us. "Did I miss lunch?" she joked. That's how she was, even now, reaching for levity when the rest of us were still trying to breathe. Back at her house later that night, Jamie sat across from me at the kitchen table while Rick stayed with her at the hospital. "You think she's going to be okay now?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I studied his face, that sweet, earnest face that reminded me of every good thing still left in the world. "I think she's already proved she's stronger than any of us knew," I said, "and whatever comes next, we'll face it." Jamie nodded, but he didn't smile. He was thinking deeper than his age allowed for, and I hated that for him. Childhood shouldn't come with these kinds of questions. The next few weeks passed slowly. Sarah healed, though the recovery wasn't kind. There were bad days. Days she couldn't lift her arms, days she cried in frustration, days when her hair began to thin even before the chemo started. Jamie shaved his head the morning after the first clump of hair came out in her brush, didn't say a word about it, just walked into her room like it was normal. "I think it looks cool," he said. She wept then, not out of fear, but out of love. And maybe guilt. "I was so angry at you for so long," she told me one night when we sat outside while Rick took Jamie to a movie. "And you never stopped waiting for me." "I never stopped being your father," I said. She nodded slowly. "You were always there, even when I refused to see it." She looked up at the stars. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to get it right. "She'd be proud of how you fight, how you love, and how you came back." Sarah smiled through tears. "I wish I could have said goodbye to her." "You did," I said. "Every day you've lived with kindness since she left. That's been your goodbye." It was quiet after that. The kind of quiet that feels like forgiveness. The next morning she asked if I'd stay for a while, move into the guest room just to be nearby during treatment. "I'm not ready to do this alone," she said. "You never had to," I replied. "We didn't need lawyers anymore. Didn't need new wills or new plans. What we needed, what we had found, was something worth far more. Each other." The guest room in Sarah's house had once been a storage space, dusty boxes, forgotten picture frames, old coats folded over broken chairs. But in a single afternoon, Jamie and I turned it into something livable. He brought me extra pillows, cleaned the blinds without being asked, set a photo of Elizabeth on the nightstand from a frame he found in the hall closet. "She should be here," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I just touched the glass of the frame and let the silence say what it needed to. The following weeks were a kind of rhythm none of us had ever rehearsed, but somehow learned by heart. Chemo days were long and quiet. Sarah would lie on the recliner in the treatment room, a thin blanket over her knees, her skin pale, her lips dry. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she watched the IV line like it might suddenly tell her what the future held. Rick came every Thursday, never missing a session. Brought crossword puzzles, bad coffee. One time, a single sunflower in a mason jar, which Sarah held like a child, holds something fragile and sacred. We learned how to make the silence less lonely. Jamie still went to school every day, but when he got home, he'd come into the guest room to sit with me. Sometimes just to read, sometimes to ask about his mom, sometimes to ask things no child should have to wonder out loud. "Did Grandma know she was going to die before she told anyone?" I looked up from my book. I think she hoped she wouldn't. "But she didn't make it." "No," he nodded, eyes scanning the carpet. "So what if Mom doesn't either?" I put my book down and turned to him. "Jamie, listen to me. I don't know what's going to happen, I wish I did, but what I do know is that your mom isn't giving up. And no matter what the doctors say, you and we're going to be here. For her. With her." He looked at me, then asked something I wasn't expecting. "Will you stay even after?" I swallowed hard. "I will." He leaned against my shoulder and didn't say anything more that night. One Saturday morning, Sarah came into the kitchen and caught me making eggs and toast. She looked thin, hair gone now, skin sensitive to light, but her eyes were sharp again, focused. "You're cooking," she said, with a ghost of a smile. "You're walking," I replied. She laughed. A soft, short sound, but real. "I was thinking," she said, sliding onto a stool at the counter, "when this is over and if I make it through all of it, I want to do something different, something that scares me." "Like skydiving?" She chuckled. "No, like living, really living. Taking Jamie on a road trip, quitting the firm, opening that used bookstore I always dreamed about." I turned off the stove and set the plate in front of her. "What stopped you before?" "Fear and pride. I didn't want to need help. Didn't want to need you." I sat down across from her, pouring 2 mugs of tea. "You always thought needing someone made you weak." She nodded. "But now I think maybe it makes me human." Outside the window, leaves danced across the yard like little bursts of flame. Later that afternoon, she asked me to walk with her, just around the block, slow, steady, quiet. Rick joined us. Jamie rode ahead on his bike, looping around to check on us every few minutes. At one point, Sarah took Rick's hand. I saw her squeeze it. He looked over, surprised, then squeezed back. I wondered how long it had been since they had touched without resentment between them. That night, Sarah sat with me on the porch. "Do you ever think about your own father?" she asked. "Did he prepare you for losing people?" I thought about that for a moment. No, he didn't prepare me, but he showed me what surviving looked like. She nodded. I think I needed to learn that too. I turned to her, reached over and gently touched her hand. "You're not just surviving, Sarah. You're teaching the rest of us how." A single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I was so angry at you for so long, and I don't even remember why anymore." I smiled sadly. "That's because anger grows in the absence of understanding." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I understand now," she whispered. And just like that, the years between us closed a little more. It was around Thanksgiving when Sarah rang the little brass bell on her nightstand and called me into her room. Her voice was weak, but there was something else behind it, a steadiness that hadn't been there the week before. When I walked in, she was sitting up in bed, a notebook in her lap. Jamie curled beside her asleep, his head against her ribs. "I want to talk about the will," she said quietly. I hesitated. "I already told you," I began, but she raised a hand to stop me. "I know what you said, and I trust you. But I need to say it, for myself. I need to know it's not about money or fairness or property." I waited. "I want Jamie to know that I thought of him in every detail," she said, "even if I don't get to see him grow up." I sat at the edge of the bed. The weight of that sentence hit me in the chest like a quiet thud. She opened the notebook and turned it toward me. Inside, in her soft handwriting, was a list. Not of assets or numbers, but memories. The rocking chair in the den. It was his favorite spot when he had colic. The gold necklace. Give it to him when he falls in love. The recipe box. He'll want Mum's banana bread one day. The letters. They're in the attic. I've been writing him every birthday. My throat tightened. She closed the book. I don't want a lawyer to decide what Jamie remembers of me. I reached for her hand. He'll remember everything, because we'll make sure of it. She nodded, slow and tired. That week, the house filled with little moments that mattered more than any doctor's update. Rick came early each morning with coffee for everyone. Jamie and I decorated the living room for the holidays, even though Sarah said not to fuss. He climbed up the ladder to hang lights on the porch, and I held it steady with one hand on his ankle. "We should have done this sooner," Rick said one night, sitting with me while Sarah slept. "Been a family again." "Ad takes a crisis," I said, "but it shouldn't." Rick looked over at me, eyes full of something unspoken. "You think she's gonna make it?" I didn't answer right away. "I think she's still fighting," I said, "and until she stops, we don't stop either." He nodded. That Sunday, Jamie came into the kitchen while I was cooking breakfast and handed me something. A photograph. It was a picture of Sarah holding him when he was just a baby, wrapped in Elizabeth's old quilt. Her hair was longer then, her face younger, but the look in her eyes was unmistakable. A love so large it barely fit in the frame. "I found it in the garage," Jamie said. "Can we put it up in the living room?" I held the photo for a long time before nodding. "Yes, we should." He took a thumbtack from the drawer and placed it carefully above the fireplace. When Sarah came out later that day, slower than usual leaning on her cane, she saw it and just stood there, tears running silently down her face. "No one's ever made me feel like I was worth remembering," she whispered. "You are," Jamie said. "To us, you are everything." Later that night, while Sarah rested, Jamie sat beside me and said, "I used to wish you were younger, so you could run with me, teach me sports, be like the grandpas in the movies." I smiled. "And now?" He looked up at me, serious. "Now I just want you to live long enough to be at my graduation. I want to see you in the crowd." I ruffled his hair gently. "You'll see me." He nodded. The house had grown quieter lately, not because we weren't speaking, But because we had run out of need to say certain things, we understood one another now, in the kind of way that doesn't need language. We had rebuilt trust, one quiet Sunday at a time. I stood on the porch that night, alone for a while, looking up at the stars. The wind had grown colder, the smell of pine drifting in from the trees at the edge of the road, and in that moment, I knew. Whatever came next, we'd already won something. Not in courtrooms, not on paper, but in each other. The first snow came the week before Christmas. Just a light dusting at first, enough to soften the rooftops, coat the grass, and hush the world beneath a thin white blanket. Jamie stood at the window when it began, hands pressed to the glass like he used to when he was little, whispering, "She'll like this." He meant Sarah. She did. When she saw the snow that morning, a smile touched her lips. Not big, not dramatic, but real. She had been so quiet lately, her energy like a flickering light that dimmed a little more with each passing day. But the snow, it gave her something to look at, something to hold on to, even for a moment. We brought her a blanket and wrapped her shoulders before helping her to the armchair near the front window. She didn't speak much that day, just watched the snow fall. Jamie sat at her feet and told her stories from school. Rick baked cookies, badly, burnt the first 2 trays, but Sarah still laughed, and that sound was a gift in itself. I knew what was coming. We all did. There was a change in her breathing, slower now. She slept more, ate less. The fire in her eyes had become a gentle ember. One night I stayed up with her after everyone had gone to bed. She was dozing in the chair, the glow of the Christmas tree lighting her face. I didn't want to wake her, but she stirred on her own and looked over at me. "I dreamed of her last night," she said. "I didn't have to ask who. She was standing by the river near our old cabin. Remember that place?" I nodded. "Of course." She looked the same, hair down, sun on her shoulders. She didn't speak, just smiled. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Maybe she's waiting for you," I said softly. Sarah looked out the window again, snow still drifting down. "I'm not ready yet," she whispered. "Jamie needs me." I nodded, but I knew she was already letting go. The next day she called Jamie into her room and handed him a small box. He brought it to the kitchen where I was washing dishes. "She told me to give this to you if she falls asleep for a long time," he said, looking uncertain. I took it from him gently. The box was small, light, wrapped in twine. Inside was a folded letter and a key. The letter was addressed simply, "Dad." I didn't open it right away, just placed it in the drawer, knowing I'd read it when I had to, not before. Christmas Eve came quiet and cold. Rick brought dinner. Jamie lit candles. Sarah was weaker, but she sat at the table for one last meal with us, even if she didn't eat. Afterward, she asked me to sit beside her in the den. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For not holding everything against me like I did to you." I smiled, tears already forming. "You're my daughter, Sarah. I never needed anything more than that." She leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she used to when she was small. And that was our last real conversation. The next morning, she didn't wake up. Her chest rose slowly, fell, rose again, then stilled. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the old mantel clock and the sound of the wind against the windows. Jamie was the one who saw it first. He didn't cry, not right away. Just stood there holding her hand and whispered, "I love you, Mom." Rick wrapped an arm around him, and I stepped outside for a moment, just long enough to feel the snow under my feet, to breathe in the cold air and let it carry my grief like smoke. When I came back in, I opened the drawer and took out the letter. I read it alone in the den. "Dad, if you're reading this, then I've finally stopped fighting. Please don't feel guilty. I know I should have come back to you sooner, should have listened, should have stayed. But everything we've shared in these last few months has been more healing than I ever thought possible. Thank you for loving me when I didn't deserve it, for raising me, for waiting, for teaching Jamie what it means to be strong and soft at the same time. The key is to the cedar chest in my closet. Everything else I couldn't say is there. Journals, notes, stories I wrote, but never shared. Some are for Jamie, some are for you. Tell him I wanted to stay longer. Tell him I fought for every second with him. I love you, Dad, don't forget that, not ever. Sarah. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. The tree lights blinked slowly beside me, and for the first time in many years, I cried without holding anything back. Sarah was gone, but her voice remained. We buried Sarah 3 days after Christmas. The ground was hard, frozen beneath the snow, and the sky stayed grey the entire day, like even the heavens were in mourning. The church was full. Neighbours, co-workers, people I barely recognized who came to pay respects to the girl they knew, the woman she had become. Jamie sat beside me, his hand clenched in mine, wearing the same navy blue suit Rick had worn to Elizabeth's funeral years ago. He didn't cry, not once, just sat very still, eyes fixed ahead, lips pressed tight together. Rick gave the eulogy. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I wasn't sure I'd get through a single word without falling apart. He told stories about their childhood, about Sarah's fierce loyalty, her stubbornness, her quick wit. And when he paused, voice cracking, it was Jamie who reached up and gently touched his uncle's arm. After the service, we stood around her grave, the cold seeping through our shoes, snow dusting our shoulders. Jamie placed a sunflower on the casket. I added a photograph, the one of Sarah holding him as a baby, Elizabeth's quilt wrapped around them both. Now she's with her, Jamie whispered. Right? I looked down at him. Yes, I said, and she's still with us too. Back at the house, everything felt too quiet, too clean. Her coat still hung by the door, her slippers were under the armchair, the shawl she wore on chilly mornings was draped over the back of the couch. But she wasn't there. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in. A scent, a sound, the space where someone used to sit, the coffee cup that goes untouched. Rick stayed for a few days, helping where he could, cooking, making phone calls, sitting with Jamie when the boy couldn't sleep. We didn't talk much about what came next. It was understood. Jamie would stay with me. There was no question. One night, as I was folding laundry in the guest room, Jamie knocked lightly and came in holding the cedar chest key. I think it's time, he said. We opened it together, kneeling on the floor. Inside were bundles of letters, neatly tied with ribbons, some marked with his name, others with mine. There were old photographs, journal entries, even a few drawings from when she was a girl. He reached for the letters marked with his name and held them against his chest. I'll read them when I'm ready, he said. I nodded and took the ones addressed to me. I didn't open them yet, just sat there with him, the two of us surrounded by pieces of her, the pieces she'd chosen to leave behind. That night, after Jamie fell asleep, I read the first letter. It was dated from when she was 17, angry, hurt, reckless with her words, but even then, buried beneath the resentment was a yearning for connection, a longing for home. Each letter after that was like watching her grow in fast forward. Her fears, her regrets, her apologies, all captured on the page. In one letter she wrote, I thought forgiveness was a door someone else had to open for me. But maybe it's been unlocked this whole time, and I was just too afraid to turn the handle. The final letter was short. I hope I gave you something back before I left, even if it wasn't enough. Thank you for being the father I couldn't see until I needed you most. I sat in the quiet, tears drying on my face, clutching the pages to my chest. Grief doesn't end, but love doesn't either. In the weeks that followed, Jamie and I fell into a rhythm again. I'd walk him to school some mornings. He'd help me with the yard. We cooked together, cleaned together, even laughed sometimes. He began to open the letters from Sarah one by one. He never said much about them, just carried them around in his backpack like armor. One morning, he found me on the porch and handed me a piece of paper. It was a letter, one he had written. Dear Mum, I'm okay. Grandpa is taking care of me, Rick too. I still get sad, but I'm not alone. I still remember your voice, your laugh. I think I always will. I hope you're with Grandma. I think she's proud of you. I know I am. Love, Jamie. He looked up at me, eyes red but shining. Can we send it? I nodded. We walked out back to the oak tree and buried it beneath the roots. I think she'll get it, he said. And I did too. The snow eventually melted, but the cold lingered. By late February, the town felt quieter than usual. Winter does that. Slows everything down, makes people huddle inside with their thoughts and regrets. Jamie and I had settled into something close to normal, though nothing about this life could be called ordinary anymore. Our days were simple: school, meals, evening walks. But in the quiet moments, Sarah was still there, not in ghostly ways, not in shadows or whispers, but in everything that held warmth. The letters she left us had become rituals. Jamie would read one every Sunday evening, always in the same spot, by the fireplace, Elizabeth's old quilt around his shoulders. Sometimes he'd read them aloud, sometimes he'd cry, other times he'd just fold the page gently and sit there for a long time. One evening he looked up at me and said, "She was so scared." I nodded. Bravery doesn't mean she wasn't scared. It means she kept going anyway. She always made me feel safe. You still are, I said. She made sure of that. Spring started to push its way in. The snow turned to rain. Little shoots of green appeared in the yard. Sarah had always loved spring. Said it made her feel like forgiveness was built into the season, like the world didn't hold grudges. I understood what she meant now. One morning, Rick called to tell me he was thinking of selling his place and moving closer. "Jamie's getting older," he said, "and I think I need to stop pretending I've got all the time in the world." He'd changed. We all had. Loss does that, forces you to choose whether you'll harden or open. Rick had opened. The following Sunday, Jamie asked me something that caught me off guard. "Can we go to the cabin?" The cabin. The old place by the river where we used to spend summers, where Elizabeth taught Sarah to fish, where Rick carved his name into a tree, where I once carried Sarah on my back when she scraped her knee so badly she couldn't walk. It had been abandoned for years, run down, forgotten, but Jamie had read about it in one of Sarah's letters. She said she felt most alive there, he said, like that place knew her better than people did. So we went. It took a full day to clear the path. The drive was long and bumpy, and the cabin was worse than I remembered. Boards rotting, roof sagging, nature trying to take it back. But Jamie didn't care. He stepped inside like it was a holy place. "This is where she stood," he said, walking to the back porch. "And that's the river she dreamed about." I watched him from the doorway. She said she was going to bring me here someday. When things got better, I stepped onto the porch beside him, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Well," I said, "then I guess she still did." He looked at me then, really looked, and in his eyes, I saw Sarah. Not just in the shape of his face or the color of his hair, but in the way he stood, the way he softened in silence, the way he held memories like treasures. We stayed for hours, walked through the woods, found the old tree with Rick's initials, now half covered in moss. Jamie added his next to it, then mine, 3 generations carved into bark. Before we left, Jamie turned to me and asked, "Will we come back?" I nodded. "Every year, if you want." He smiled. She'd like that. Back home, we planted sunflowers in the backyard. Jamie said it was for her, said he wanted something to bloom every year, even if the rest of the world forgot. She always said they looked like they were reaching for something. I looked at him. "They are," I said. He didn't ask what. He already knew. Summer came early that year. The sun lingered longer in the evenings, casting golden light through the kitchen windows and warming the porch where Jamie and I spent most of our nights now. The flowers he planted bloomed tall and radiant, and every morning he watered them like it was sacred duty. It had been 6 months since Sarah passed. Grief had changed shape. It no longer came like a wave knocking us off our feet. It was more like the tide now, always present, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, but never completely gone. Jamie was growing, taller, quieter in some ways, more thoughtful. He asked more questions about his mom than he used to. Not just about her illness or her death, but about her life. What was she like in high school? Did she like thunderstorms? Did she ever want to run away? I answered every question, and when I didn't know the answer, we'd look through her journals together, piecing her back together word by word. One night, we sat on the porch as the sky turned indigo, and he said something that stopped me cold. "I think she forgave you long before she told you." I looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've read her letters. And people don't write like that unless they're already halfway home." Halfway home, the phrase stuck with me for days. Later that week, I finally visited Elizabeth's grave. I hadn't been there in almost a year. I brought sunflowers and the photograph of Sarah and Jamie, the one Jamie had placed above the fireplace last winter. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind move through the tall grass, letting silence speak. "I don't know if I did it all right," I whispered. But I stayed. I listened, I waited, and when she came back, I didn't turn her away. I laid the flowers down gently. "She's with you now. I hope she remembers the lullabies, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, the way you used to tuck her in." My voice caught. "I hope you're holding her." I left the photo resting against the stone and walked back to the truck. Back home, Jamie was waiting with 2 glasses of lemonade and a new drawing, this one of the oak tree behind the house, with 3 sets of initials carved into its trunk. "Do you miss her every day?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "Me too." He handed me the drawing. "She told me once," he said, "that she felt like part of her never grew up, like she was still that little girl who just wanted her dad to say everything would be okay." I looked at the picture in my hand. "And I hope," he added, "that hearing you say it, even when it wasn't, helped her believe it anyway." I reached over and pulled him into a hug. "You helped her believe it too, Jamie. You gave her peace." He buried his face in my shoulder and didn't let go for a long time. That night, I pulled out Sarah's final letter, the one I hadn't read yet. It was shorter than the rest. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if you've made it this far, then you kept your promise. You stayed. You carried Jamie. You carried me. Tell him I'm proud of him. Tell him I see him, and Dad, I see you too. You were never the man I was running from. You were the home I was afraid I'd forgotten how to return to. Thank you for waiting at the door. Love, Sarah." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside Elizabeth's shawl. The porch light buzzed softly behind me, and from the kitchen I heard Jamie humming a tune his mother used to sing. Forgiveness had not come quickly, and it hadn't come easily. But it had come not in grand gestures, in letters, in shared meals, in porch light and sunflowers and the quiet presence of someone who stayed. In the end, she came home, and we, the ones who remained, learned how to live again. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or brought back a memory you thought was long gone, I want to hear it. Right now, scroll down and leave a comment. Tell us what this story meant to you, or share your own. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a sibling, a parent, or someone you haven't spoken to in a long time. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because the next story might just speak even louder to your heart. Now, go ahead and click the next video on your screen. I promise. It's one you don't want to miss.